Hey, it's all, and today we're going to go over Primordial Stones, a way to customize a special ring coming in patch 10.0.7 with these cool special effects. The focus is mostly on the fun of messing around with these stones once you have a bunch of these in your possession. What are the good ones? What are some good combinations? And as we get closer to the patch going live, I'll produce a new guide detailing how to obtain and upgrade them. So for now, please like the video if this turns out to be useful, subscribe for more content, and let's start with some quick facts. First being that this is the PTR, everything can change before going live. So far there are 25 Primordial Stones that are separated into 6 different categories whose names I'm going to make up. Blue represents water, deep orange is fire, Death Knight Red, I'm going to call that blood, purple is support, green is nature, and orange is earth. You can equip up to 3 of these stones into this ring here, which has no secondary stats. The stones can be removed without destroying them. Stones can be upgraded too, up to what is possibly an item level of 424, so you'll be collecting a bunch of these stones over time and only probably carrying about a handful of them. It's a worthwhile talking point that freeing up to 25 inventory slots for these stones is going to be annoying, but as we go along you'll find that many of these stones that you'll run into will be ground into dust almost immediately. So now let's go over the stones by family, starting with fire. The Flame Lick Stone makes it so that dealing damage has a chance to deal a short bit of damage over time. Not very impressive, and there's no indication on what damage will proc this effect or what the internal cooldown is. The Searing Smoky Stone makes you deal cone damage every time you interrupt a cast. Now I managed to test this one out, and it works off of single target interrupts, namely Rebuke and Avenger Shield for paladins, and the proc does not seem to have an internal cooldown. However, it doesn't proc off AoE interrupts, like shields thrown by Divine Toll or the extra shields off Divine Resonance, but this can be really good for Mythic Plus if many people were using the stone. That's a ton of potential damage to throw out. The Raging Magma Stone procs when you have an active bubble and you're getting hit. For a few seconds, you deal what is basically thorn damage to all melee characters, and the damage return has no cooldown, so obviously this one's for the tanks. And the Entropic Fellstone increases the fire damage that you deal by 60% and turns said damage into the Chaos property. I guess the point of that is that the damage can't be resisted. It's worth noting that the 3 stones here are the only stones that deal fire damage. Moving on, let's look at the Water family of stones. The Exuding Steam Stone makes it so that when you receive heals, you and 2 nearby buddies are healed for more. Cute. The Deluging Water Stone makes your abilities proc a heal over time on the target. Without knowing the duration or the internal cooldown, not sure how effective this stone is at the moment. The Cold Frost Stone procs a damage absorb every 20 seconds that slows melee attackers who strike it. It's reminiscent of other bubbles from Legion or Battle for Azeroth. And the Freezing Ice Stone is a straightforward damage and slow proc. Something interesting to point out with this school, imagine if you're on a 20 or 30 man team and everyone happened to have these healing stones equipped. Outside of big damage bursts, I wonder if it would be possible to drop a healer knowing that there's a ton of passive healing going around. Let's move on to the Earth family, which like the Water family has some predictable properties. The Gleaming Iron Stone makes it so that standing still will spawn a damage absorb bubble and increases auto attack damage for 12 seconds. 3 seconds of standing still makes this fairly simple to manipulate, but I'm curious about the internal cooldown, because here we have the Indomitable Earthstone, which gives a bigger damage bubble, but it's dependent on taking damage. And the Shining Obsidian Stone makes it so that when you get an Absorb Shield, and it has to be from other Earthstones like these, you deal damage to enemies around you. Later I'm going to get into combinations, but naturally, this can be a great combination for tanks who want to absorb lots of damage and want enemies to pay the price for still being alive. I'm not sure if there's a cooldown to it, I'm hoping there isn't because it's pretty dependent on other stones' effects. Let's look at the Blood family, to which there are only 2 stones at the moment. The Desirous Bloodstone procs a lifesteal effect on enemies. The Necromantic Deathstone will activate the Blood, Frost, and Unholy Primordial Stone effects for 45 seconds when passing by a corpse. Now I just talked about the Bloodstone. I'm presuming that this is the Frost Stone which procs a damage bubble, and right now there actually is no Unholy Stone. The closest thing that I can find is this Pestilent Plague Stone, which is in the Nature family, but it's kind of unholy, right? Anyway, I hope this works in Mythic Plus, which would basically mean that when mobs start going down, players can get a nice throughput boost. Now let's look at the Nature family. I already talked about the Pestilent Plague Stone, which may change to a different family in future builds. The Storm Infused Stone deals cleave damage to up to 3 targets, but it's dependent on critical strikes. The Wild Spirit Stone seems to support other nature stones, but also any stone that does heals. It spits out even more healing to other targets. This might be a must-have for anyone interested in using their ring to enhance their heals. The Wind Sculpted Stone gives a stacking speed buff. Now, it takes a few seconds to gain the 5 stacks, which doesn't make the stone very strong when you need it to be, but I bet it's great to use for running old instances. The Echoing Thunderstone needs some testing so we understand how it works, but my guess is that as you move, you gain stacks, and when you get enough stacks, your next ability deals extra damage. Most likely, this is best for melee specs. And finally, the Prodigious Sandstone's tooltip is broken, but according to Wowhead, it deals damage to nearby enemies when there are more than 3 nearby, which makes for some easy AoE damage and, well, non-existent single target damage. Finally, we have the Purple, or what I see as the Support family of stones. The Sparkling Mana Stone restores a pathetic amount of mana whenever frost effects go off, so these stones here. Now, if the Mana Stone has no internal proc and it depends on the Frost Stones, I say use this along with the Cold Frost and the Deluging Water Stones for the best consistency. I'll talk a little bit more on this later. The Prophetic Twilight Stone needs some testing just to understand it, I think. It says that damage effects from your Primordial Stones trigger your healing effects, and that healing effects from your Primordial Stones trigger your damage effects, so does this mean that there's a way to get an overall proc rate increase of the other stones? Same goes for the Swirling Mojo Stone. I'm not sure if this means nearby mobs at low health will insta-die or be stunned or what, but if so, that would actually be pretty cool. The Humming Arcane Stone fires off arcane missiles, but you need to be using a stone from different stone families. Not quite sure how the damage is either. The Harmonic Music Stone increases tertiaries for you and your party for 8 seconds after entering combat. This is a great stone for grinding down to upgrade other stones with. And finally, the Obscure Pastel Stone is as unreliable as you can get, having a chance to proc any of the other 24 stones effects. For all we know though, this could be a dark horse. So let's make some example stone combinations that focus on offense or defense or utility. Straightforward damage combos include, basically taking up any of these stones here and choosing the ones that suit your playstyle. Are you ranged or melee? How mobile are you? Do you focus a lot on critical strike? For multi-target and I'd say Mythic Plus Fortified, crit heavy users should take up Storm Infused. Melee could take up that and Prodigious Sand. Pestilent Plague seems like a good fit, but it depends on how potent that dot actually is. Flamelick seems to be in the same situation, but Searing Smoky seems really effective in packs with casters. In this case, you've got to rely on single interrupts because this stone won't proc off of AoE based interrupts and stuns and so on. For single target damage, Freezing Ice isn't an option, and one could go all fire and use the Entropic Fellstone for additional damage. Casters specifically can use Humming Arcane with other strong bursty effects like Freezing Ice, Desirous Blood, Echoing Thunder, Flame Licked, or others to fire off those extra arcane missiles. Offensive-based tanks could take up any of these stones too, but there are a few more options. Warriors and Druids, for example, are constantly absorbing damage and can proc the Raging Magma for a steady flow of Thorns damage, enhance that with Entropic Fell, and slot that in with Prodigious Sand for constant ticking damage. Personally, I think that there are way more fun combinations when we look at defensive and utility options. We've already got a decent arsenal of trinkets, and thankfully we're only replacing rings. So instead of adding more damage that we've already got, how about some different effects to plug our vulnerabilities? Consider this one, the appropriately named Wild Spirit. This procs off of other healing effects from Primordial Stones. Desirous Blood is technically a heal, so would it make Wild Spirit go off? That's potentially a lot of passive healing. Now, slot this with Exuding Steam that spills heals based off of any heals received, which could again proc Wild Spirit, which could proc Exuding Steam, which isn't likely. There's probably going to be a line drawn somewhere. Fights like Rosageth have constant passive damage that really challenge healers. What if the raid was outfitted with a Cold Frost, an Indomitable Earth, and Gleaming Iron? In a large group, that's potentially millions of healing and lots of mana that can be saved for high burst moments that could also be mitigated by these absorbs. If one could convince their raid to mostly slot healing based stones, could one or more healers be dropped? I think we can expect the last third of the season to kind of break with all sorts of meme comps based on this ring. I'm curious about the potency of Sparkling Mana. As I mentioned, it's a really pitiful mana return, but if it's dependent on frost effects from other sources, does it have to be your own or from others? Because then, we'll have to closely examine the internal cooldown of this stone. It's unlikely, but if there is no cooldown to this effect, that's a potential return of 20,000 mana per minute. That's if there are constant frost effects going around like exuding steam and delusion water. Over the course of a given fight, that could be anywhere between 100 to 200,000 mana that the healer might not have had. And how tanky can a tank get? There's already lots of absorb options and some hybrid defensive options like Raging Magma and Necromantic Death, which give some lifesteal and absorbs and extra damage. Shining Obsidian, which relies on absorbs from other stones, can sound overpowered if we pair it with Cold Frost and Gleaming Iron. Does the combination of Cold Frost and Shining Obsidian mean that I can spawn spikes even while out of combat? Not quite sure, but I really want to find out. That's going to be enough combos for the moment at least. Let's do some feedback, starting by addressing the elephant in the room. In crude words, this whole ring thing is a system. And to WoW players, a system is whenever we have to do a side grind like the Forbidden Reach stuff, in order to get something that we need, the ring and the stones, for whatever activity that we want to do. I'd say this is way less impactful than other systems because by the time this patch goes live, we'll be like 2/3 of the way through the season. This is a feature targeted for the kind of player who just wants more to do. According to recent blue posts, this is not going to be treated like a traditional system either. Keys that are used to explore the vaults where we get these stones are found by killing rares and finding treasures throughout the Forbidden Reach zone. The keys are tradable account-wide, so in theory I can switch to multiple alts, farm up a bunch of keys per alt, funnel all that stuff to my main, and fully unlock a vault each day. Sounds cool, but I imagine the goalpost is just going to shift, and players are going to want the stones themselves to be account tradable, but that's just how it goes. An early critique that I do have about this feature is that it's not likely to get the kind of polish a bona fide expansion feature deserves, as in, we're going to wrangle with a bunch of these stones in our inventory to manage and grind down, and well, I find that a little bit inconvenient. I think that one of the challenges here is that this ring's throughput is going to compete against having no secondary stats whatsoever. For example, my character has a pair of 395 rings, but if I were to replace one of those, that's minus 5% haste. That's a lot. As a Feely crafter, that's not a big deal to me. I like fun things more than straight stats, but others are going to immediately write off this entire feature as a waste of effort, considering the timing. That also means that no one gets hurt, really. But, well, that's all I gotta say for now. Share your thoughts in a comment, like the video, subscribe for more stuff, and I'll catch you later. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.